On the worst nights, it felt as if everything encroached at once. The rain found every gap and inlet, soaking into the earth and rising back up through the strata of flattened cardboard on which we slept. The cold breached all our bundled layers, our damp and matted jumpers, our cast-off coats and scavenged sleeping bags. Often I awoke to the sound of fights outside, clumsy fingers rooting for hidden valuables, a man's boozy breath in my ear. I slept in my clothes and boots, tucked my scant cash in my sock. People who knew me left me alone. Others I had to hurt a couple of times before they learned. Dawn was always a relief. The night was over, the trials of the day not yet begun. Whatever had passed in the darkness was forgiven. For a few seconds, as the sun offered its first tentative touch and the sky, on a clear day, lost its blackness and became first bruised and then bloody, those of us that lived on the encampment, that stubborn mess of tents and lean-tos, sheets of tarpaulin and stolen boards propped against poles and trees, were briefly allowed to feel all the things denied to us in the night and through much of the day. Faint hope, tentative warmth, a moment of ease. So to all the other insults and injustices of that day, the violence of the officials' arrival and the destruction of their passing, I must add this, that they caught us, whether deliberately or not, at our freest. I heard them before I saw them. A low, hive-like hum down the road. I guessed the time at soon after 6. It was early March. The morning still carried the residual chill of that years-long winter, but you could feel the promise of spring in the air. When I pushed aside the draped tarpaulin under which I slept and rose stiffly to my feet, I saw that others had already gathered and were staring off down the road, towards the deepening drone of whatever was approaching. For a strange, still moment, it seemed like the most natural and ordinary meeting of people. A small group of neighbours, hands on hips, speculating as to what was afoot. But then the convoy rounded the bend, and in an instant we were alone and scrambling, neighbours no more. The more military-looking police were at the front. 2 vans with grills on the windows bearing black-clad visored officers. Behind them were ambulances, uniformed cops, and buses for whoever the task force managed to round up. Lastly came the vehicles of non-specific destruction. The JCBs and bulldozers, the skip trucks, an unmarked van filled with contracted workmen in hard hats and high-vis overalls. We scattered. People ran for the pieced-together structures that had been their homes and began throwing things into bags, tossing aside tarpaulins and ground sheets, uncovering their secret caches of money, food, drugs. There were children in some of the tents, and they began to scream, which set off the panicked barking of the encampment's dogs. As people shouted to each other, language became an irrelevance. Wherever you were from, a global shorthand was at work. Police, trucks, run. I managed my fear by cataloguing my minor advantages. I was fast, I was alone. I had attached significance to only a few small possessions. Humble comforts were a trap. You fought for something that kept you warm, but then it came to mean something to you, evolved into some meagre symbol of achievement, and you clung to it, even as it slowed you down. Around me, as I began to run, too many people were making this mistake. Hamstrung by what they carried, stumbling as they dropped unwieldy items under their feet. By this point, I'd gathered my rucksack and the little bundle of valuables at the bottom of my sleeping bag and was moving quickly. The encampment had been pieced together on a patch of waste ground, recently cleared to make way for development. A raised train track and arched bridge provided shelter on one side. Beyond that was a high fence that marked the border with a largely disused industrial estate. This was the direction in which most people were heading. Once over the fence, the empty warehouses and equipment stores, the huddled buildings and maze of units that formed the estate would offer ample opportunity to scatter and, like droplets of spilled water absorbed into the earth, vanish back into the city.